Hello and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. We are just confirming that yes, we are indeed still alive. And I know it was a 3 week gap. This time of year and personal circumstances, which I will not divulge on either of our ends, has led to some hurdles. But we are here to get at least one more episode before the end of the year out. This might be the last one of the year, just depending on how not this coming week, but the next week goes. So I'll keep you guys
Yeah.
posted on what that's going to look like. But don't sweat it. Of course, we'll have a monumental New Year show. We'll get that all planned because we always do that. It's something we always do. I mean,
Hopefully Geo can join us.
that would be nice. But I mean, like, there's a decade's worth of news to cover from this past year, so we'll definitely be on the air for 5 or 6 hours. To quote all the great European leaders in 2022, as long as it takes. But then hold on, let me amend my statement. As long as we can, because that's in reality.
Yes.
But uh, we do, speaking of a decade's worth of news, have quite a bit to cover, and I just want to take an early opportunity to brag that one of our predictions from several years ago, 2019, we're seeing play out right now. You can tell by the title of this episode, High Seas Piracy. We said this was going to happen in 2019. We said that as the global order breaks down, we're going to see navies, particularly the U.S. Navy, resort to pirate tactics, and that's what we're seeing right now. We'll cover plenty of that. Not only the Venezuela case, which is one everyone's paying attention to right now. There's some cases in the Middle East right now with Iranian tankers, and also I would say most concerning, some cases in the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea with the so-called Russian Shadow Fleet. It looks like they're really trying to provoke something there. But before we get too deep into that, we have a very short and very brief, I assume, minutia minute to cover.
Yes, I'll try to make it as brief as possible. So, yeah, let's begin with the frontline news. And I have the overall map from today. As you can see, Ukrainians are still exerting a lot of pressure in the north in Kupiansk. Kupiansk could very well fall to the Ukrainians. I'll expand on that later. And several gains by the Russians in the Seversk direction and Mirnograd direction, Pokrovsk direction, Ivanovka direction, and in the Gulyapolye section. I'll also cover some stuff that has been happening north and northwest east of Kamyanske in Zaporozhye along the Dnieper from almost a week ago, but I haven't heard much since then. So let's begin with Kupiansk. And with the first map, you can see the purple outline that the Ukrainians in 3 weeks have managed to recapture a ton of Kupiansk. They have been able to take some of the apartment complexes, but not those around the school. And it appears that the Russians are still not going to leave. Now, some of the reasons for this Russian collapse, there's many, and there's many reasons why the Ukrainians have prioritized this. And when we finish with Kupiansk, you'll understand why. But the main reason, the immediate reason why the Russians are not able to stop the Ukrainian advancements, is because they are outnumbered, and um, so they they have a man shortage, and they also have a logistics issue trying to supply the west bank of Kupiansk and getting things across the river. You can see in this map that the river actually has two areas. There's a small island in between, wedged between these. So this is a notoriously difficult area. Um, let's move on to the next slide, and you can see which areas the Ukrainians have had a lot of success and where the Russians are trying to hold them back. So around that blue circle with the red outline, that's the area that the Russians are trying to stop the Ukrainians. Of course, what the Ukrainians want to do is cut the Russians completely off from any supplies coming across the Oskol River. Well, that's the river that bifurcates the city. and they're trying to hold on to the south as well. They know what the Ukrainians are trying to do. Of course, if the Ukrainians had an air force, this outcome would have been, I think, already decided.
R.I.P. to the Ghost of Kiev, by the way.
Rest in peace. Yeah. So now the Russians in this time, if we go to the next slide, which gives you an overall view, notice the arrow at the top. So that arrow in the top, most of it is in a section that's like the green of the map itself. It's not blue and it's not orange, and the reason is this is an area that frequently there is either close, face-to-face combat, or what has the trend has shown is there's almost nobody there, and immediately outside of this no man's land are each of the warring parties sending drones for both observation and strike capabilities and taking out any infantry that moves in. This, to some degree, is helping the Russians, but they would need a lot more. Now, if you look to the right of those blue arrows, of course, you can see where the blue arrows want to cut the Russians off on the west side of Kupiansk. And there's that highway I was talking about. Now, the Russians made many gains, but they still have not reached the highway. And I suspected as much that the Ukrainians would have better success in taking parts of the city rather than the Russians getting to the highway that you see outlined in red that disappears towards the bottom right hand corner. The Russians have a foothold in Petropavlovsk, but that's not enough. Now, to get back to why the Ukrainians have prioritized Kupiansk, and it does relate back to the Donetsk region, particularly to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. I was puzzled initially why the Russians wanted to move on and go down towards Kupiansk from the west side of the Oskol River instead of just push through from the east. And you can see why with this arrow. This arrow represents railroads and automobile roads, but it also links up with Urazovo and Valiuki in the Russian area. This area has a denser population, many small towns, and it's just easier to resupply their forces. And the Ukrainians are well aware that if they kept moving down after capturing Kupiansk along the Oskol River, that eventually they would have like a highway that leads into that area of north of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and would go towards Liman as well. So that is why the Ukrainians smartly have pushed so hard in Kupiansk. The next place we're going to look at is Seversk, and I think this wasn't the case when we did the last show, but the Russians have taken Seversk at least a week ago, and have expanded the zone of control rather quickly. As you can see, I've circled where actually Seversk is, but the Russians have moved several dozens of kilometers, probably like 60 to 70 kilometers west of there. And in the top of the frame, you can see that the Russians are also pressing hard towards the Severodonetsk River. They're capturing more and more of that forest territory. Remember that the Russians only controlled about 25% of this territory at the beginning of 2025. They almost completely lost it because the Ukrainians were very successful in pushing them even further back in 2024. To get a better overall idea, the next slide will show you what the objectives are going to be for the Russians in the Seversk-Liman direction. So this S-shaped line at the top begins with Liman, and it kind of terminates in an area not too far from Bakhmut. This is the area that the Russians will want to control before they press any further, because west of here is that conurbation of Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and much further south, which you don't see in the map, is Konstantinovka. Slavyansk is the bigger of the cities. So that's the strategy that the Russians are working with. If you see more fortifications, it is because in recent weeks, Google Maps has decided to show them. But we'll get into fortifications when we begin dealing with Zaporozhye. Now, there's been a small gain in this direction. The next map will show it. This is south of Seversk, and it's in an area of Vaskovka, near south of Razino. I believe the name is Bogudarnie. It's too obscured for me to read it honestly with the
You see that trying to pronounce the
pistol
Ukrainian
icons.
name almost killed him right there.
It almost this is what I'm risking my life for you people. Anyways, nah, I'm
And we're
joking.
not just talking about
So
Miroshrovitz.
it's worse than Red Rose.
So
So
true.
so true, yeah. So next, we move to Mirnograd, or the Mirnograd Pokrovsk direction. Of course, so Mirnograd, just like Pokrovsk, have fallen. The Russians are now in a process of rooting out Ukrainians who are still in Mirnograd and who are trying to break out. Now, there was about a half a dozen that tried to break out about 4 or 5 days ago, which was incredibly foolhardy because honestly, all the maps indicated that they were going to move through red territory, and they were liquidated. Now, this doesn't mean it was easy for the Russians because there is an event that took place. Now, understand in this map that you're seeing with the arrows, they're pointing to a town called Grishne, and Grishne is the immediate town next to Pokrovsk. Um, there was a platoon of what I think can easily be described as young recruits who were wiped out here. There's several videos to explain why. One of the videos, and History Legends covered this, is you had a unit, three, I believe, three ATVs and 9 motorcycles, or 9 quad bikes and 3 old-fashioned motorcycles, something like that. Anyways, the road is filled with all of these burning, but there are no human bodies. There aren't bodies anywhere. So obviously, there was a hit. Maybe somebody was wounded, but nobody was killed, and they've all run away. Another video shows that immediately south of this area, you see the bottom arrow that does this upside down L shape? That's the road that the Russians had taken. Except this time they used what I believe were 2 or 3 armored personnel carriers and possibly 1 tank or infantry fighting vehicle. These were also decommissioned. And I didn't see bodies, but according to history legends, the deaths came later, and there was video evidence for this. So wisely, the soldiers ran away and tried to get back to lines. But you see mortar fire and drones hitting them. And some of these guys just don't move, and the drones hit them anyways. Today, I saw a video of 2 Ukrainians getting killed by drones, and they won't move. At first, people, I mean, I think history legend might be right in presuming that these guys are tired from running, and that's why they're allowing this to happen. But the Ukrainians are on one knee, and maybe in this case, or maybe in both cases, but definitely in this case, it's almost like the Ukrainians have been told to freeze and not move, as if that's a better way to evade FPV drones. I don't know. It just it doesn't make sense. And unfortunately, both of the Ukrainian soldiers were killed on the spot, just standing still. It's bizarre. The next slide will show you is the fall of Minograd, all the territory that's been taken in the last 2 3 days. As I said, it's fallen, but there are buildings to clear out. I've seen some um, um, prisoners being taken, usually a dozen to 2 dozen, or 4 or 5 in some instances, but there's not that much of a big garrison. Of course, we don't know yet. We don't know if there are still hundreds left, because they could be holed up and they could be hiding. So it's hard to tell. Next, we're going to just very briefly touch on an area well north of this area where the Russians have made a small gain, north of Pokrovsk, as you can see. In the right-hand corner, those are the gains that the Russians have made in Konstantinovka. The Russians have expanded the zone of control there. The next slide will show you where the Russians have gained. This is well north of Shakhove. This is north of Sokivka or Toretske on the other side of the river. I forget the name of this river. But the Russians basically are taking the area that they once had but lost. Now they're retaking it. And lastly, there's a close up of the territory that they took. This is a small area, probably with some fortifications that are not depicted here. And they're just consolidating that they've taken all of Sokivka, or adjacent to Toretsk. Um, Next, we come to the southern Donetsk Zaporozhye section in Gulia Polye. Now, the Russians have gained over half of Gulia Polye, which is a considerable amount compared to last time. You can see now what they're trying to do. Essentially, they've taken this huge field south of the city, and the reason is as I'll demonstrate soon enough. They want roads that go into Gulyapolye, because they will want to turn Gulyapolye and what they're turning Pokrovsk into, and that is like a logistics hub. Now, I've just remembered, I forgot to tell you about those Russians that were killed. So there was another video of a tank that was in a garage that was destroyed by the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians were aware that the Russians were planning an attack and they're going to go head on. And a second video that I forgot to mention is those guys that were on the motorcycles and everything. One of the motorcycles became stuck or stopped working. It's hard to tell in the video, and the whole troop stopped. And that's how you know that these guys don't have experience, because that wouldn't have happened with a crew that had more
Yeah.
experience. So that was indeed a fatal mistake for them. So next slide basically shows you that the Russians want to squeeze this section out before they take the remainder of Gulyapolye. I would say the Ukrainians control about 33% of Gulyapolye, 33, 35, somewhere around there. Even they, according to their own Telegram channels, are quite surprised by this. And lastly, for Gulyapolye, we have the logistics that the Russians want to use. So you can see at the bottom, those lines represent the new railroad. The eastern or rightmost terminus of this bottom line that's Mariupol. And then it would go on to Melitopol. Uh, and then now you can see why they need Gulyapolye. You can see those 3 lines at the top converge towards Gulyapolye. And I'm going to send you, Constantine, an image why they need to work ever so delicately. The Russians do, by finding ways to move around these trench lines, because going head on is a death sentence. So if you show them, yeah, there it is. You can see just how complex these lines are now.
Yeah, I'm getting it up
Barbed wire,
right now.
elevated mounts, dragon's teeth, anti-tank ditches, like the works. Now, this is also telling you that the Ukrainians, they don't want to give up, but they need to slow the pace of the Russians. But the question is manpower, because if you look, if we go back to the slide, the other slide, you can see that the Russians have already taken a considerable amount of these new fortifications. However, to do that, you have to attack them from the north. You can't attack them directly on. But once they do, then they can exert pressure. Of course, then they will exert pressure somewhere else close by on the front line, and the Ukrainians will then have to decide which of the two, because they usually don't have the numbers in comparison to what they have in Kupiansk, to stop them in both places. Lastly, we come to Zaporozhye in the Kamyansky direction. So the Russians have moved on into Stefanovsk, Plavy, which means pale, by the way. Along the Dnieper, they've expanded their control there, and they're retaking some territory they already had. But the second slide will show you um, this new territory that they captured about 6 days ago. I haven't heard any news. There are areas of the front line where you don't hear news for a while. But just look at the pink outline, the old territory that was taken when the Russians took that new town north of Kamyansk and Plavy. Um, they're entering the trench ditches from the narrow point, right? And moving in and counting that they're not manned instead of going directly on. That's what I mean, right? The pressure from the bottom is just that, it's just pressure from the bottom. You wouldn't want to attack any further. But what gaining this territory will give the Russians is a way to resupply those towns north of Kamyansk in order to keep pushing at the narrow end of the ditches. And that's it for the frontline news.
Well, as always, a very good, concise summary of everything that's happened over the past 3 odd weeks. I will remark that Kupiansk, I won't necessarily say it surprised me, but you'll notice, at least I've noticed, but you'll notice if you pay attention to the entirety of the front lines, it shifts, but there's always one area where the Ukrainians will put up very stiff resistance and will actually make headway against the Russians,
Yep.
almost at the expense of everywhere else. Which earlier on in the war, you could question the logic of that, saying 2022 or the 2023 counteroffensive. You could question the logic of that. But going on from 2024, especially post Kursk, and into 2025, it does logically make sense that they do choose the one area where they are going to stand their ground at the expense of the other area. And yes, it is a stalling tactic. And as we saw with the fortification, it is all a stalling tactic because at this point, you can probably imagine in Kiev right now with the murmurs of war by 2027, war by 2030, etc. The goal of the hardliners is to hold out or broker some sort of ceasefire, even if just temporary, until that arbitrary date where all of Europe and all of NATO is going to get involved. And I think that is the belief of a non insignificant amount of both the Ukrainian political and military elites, but also the Ukrainian population. That if we just are able to slow the grind down to a sustainable level where our losses are sustainable, where Russian losses are significant, then we can turn the situation around. It's delusional, But that is
Hmm.
what they have staked their hope in. And I know this is a comparison we probably made towards the start of the war, but in many ways, the Ukrainian side continues to ape the Spanish Republicans from the Spanish Civil War because their entire war strategy was we just need to stall the nationalists until war breaks out in Europe because everyone knew at that point by 1936 1937 that there was going to be another continental war in Europe and that they just had to wait for the British and French to bail them out. That was the entire strategy of the Spanish Republicans from pretty much 1937 onward in the Spanish Civil War. And like I said, it's a comparison we made earlier on in the war, but it looks like that is the entirety of the Ukrainian strategy right now. Can we just hold on? Can we bear these losses? Can we bear the destruction and just desolation of our nation until we reach the arbitrary date where Europe decides it's strong enough to fight Russia and we can all just blow up in a nuclear war? I guess. But on that note, let me just get the information I want to work with here because I want to talk a little bit about Ukrainian demographics. If you have any thoughts on that.
Um, yeah, I mean, part of the reason why they have to keep talking about war in 2030 is because that's about the only thing that will allow the Ukrainians to believe that they will be rescued, right?
Yes.
I honestly had a Ukrainian friend older than me, 9 years older than me, and he asked, Russia's had a couple of really bad weeks, and I'm going, okay, how bad have these weeks been? They're rejecting all these stupid peace proposals by Trump and the West. I mean, and I asked him that, what makes you think that they had a couple of bad weeks? If they did, in the way that I think you're describing it, they would have taken these peace proposals more seriously. And I don't think that's happened.
No, not at all.
And so he asked me, what are the chances that Putin could be, um, thrown out of power? I'm going like, is this guy like, like, I'm sorry, but he just never. I don't know. It's like I feel like I'm telling him the same stuff I've been telling him for years, even before the war started.
Okay, I did find what I am looking for, but your story did remind me of an aside of a rabbit hole I fell down where I don't know why, but the YouTube algorithm feeds me some bizarre stuff. Some of it's good, some of it's just outright bizarre. But one thing it's been feeding me, especially now that they have the auto dubbing system where they put the AI generated voice over foreign language videos, is I've been getting a lot of Polish commentary on the Ukraine war. And it's about what you'd expect. And that sounds like what a lot of that commentary goes down to because I'll listen to it every once in a while here and there because I am curious what they have to say. You'll occasionally get somebody who goes against the grain who really questions this more so from an anti-Ukrainian than a quote-unquote pro-Russian perspective because of the, let's just say, outstanding issues, both historical and contemporarily, between Poland and Ukraine. But it does harken to the same level of delusion when I do listen to these things. That it's, oh, the Russians are having a bad week, and that all the numbers that Keith Kellogg puts out there that he gets fed by the Ukrainians, those are completely accurate, and we're just going to turn around any day now. But to return to reality, these figures come from Reuters, and it's a pretty bleak demographic picture.
Yeah.
So, estimated population in 2022, beginning 2022, of Ukraine was 42 million people. And this is now 36 million. However, they do not clarify whether that includes the territories under Russian occupation. I could not find whether or not it did clarify that. With by 2051, which I know is a bit of a stretch to project 25, 26 years in the future, is 25 million. Citing the World Factbook, the CIA World Factbook in 2024, Ukraine has the highest mortality rate and lowest birth rate of any country in the world. About 3 deaths for every new birth. And Ukrainian government estimates say that life expectancy decreased from a very low 65.2 years for men in 2022, which, I mean, that's like the level Russia was at the collapse of the Soviet Union, for context. So Ukraine really never demographically recovered the way that many of the other former Soviet republics did. But that's down because of the attrition rate of the war to 57.3 years. For women, this has gone from 74.4 to 70.9. And it's also one of the countries with the highest immigration rates in Europe, if not the world. March 2025 estimates put it at about 5.2 million Ukrainians have left the country since the start of the war, mainly in Europe. And I will compound that with figures. I'll need to dig up the source. It's been a while for this, but I constantly talked about this before the Ukrainian war even started. That post Maidan, Ukraine was averaging about a million people emigrating every year, many to Russia, many to other parts of Europe. But from 2014 to say I think 2019, they were averaging about a million people a year leaving the country, and that is now compounded with this. And now that there is the, I guess, rumors of a peace deal, because I guess some people put stock in whatever photo op Dmitriev does with Witkoff or whatever vague statements Trump might make. There's the talk about the rebuilding of Ukraine and the returning of refugees to Ukraine. Well, I can tell you, I severely doubt that we're going to see really any appreciable number of refugees return to Ukraine whatsoever. And
If I could just interject for
please do.
very, very briefly. Now, I read this week that apparently something like 2.3 million Syrians in the year since liberation from Assad have returned. I simply, I don't, who is coming up with that number? Like, Turkey had something like 3.2 million, probably more by now. Are you saying that Turkey lost like half their population or a third of the population of, Arab Syrian refugees?
Um,
It seems, I mean, I don't know, but like, I wouldn't put it past Western media to completely fabricate this.
oh no, not at
On
all.
the other hand, I could be totally wrong. I don't know. Like, I mean, Syria is kind of destroyed. The sanctions were just lifted. Remember that just recently happened. Like, some of the sanctions have been lifted, but the country is largely devastated. Are they getting the oil revenues now?
No,
I
I do have
I don't
quite a
think so.
bit to say about Syria, so I'll put a bookmark in that. But I will
Yeah, let's
say,
put a bookmark and return to what you
yeah,
were
but
uh,
I will
what you were
say
talking about.
that one follow up comment based on what you say about Syria is given the political and ideological leanings of a lot of people who left Syria over the course of the civil war, who ended up either in Turkey or Lebanon in particular. A lot of them, I think, could be duped by thinking Jelani is like going to lead them into this great new era of prosperity. But like I said, we'll talk
Yeah.
about that later. But in terms of Ukraine's demographics, once again, and I'm not even sure if those are numbers that include the occupied territories, which is about 20% of the country at this point, or whether it excludes it. But no, the minute the war ends, the minute the borders open, I mean, we saw this when they lifted the restriction on men ages 18 to 22. When they lifted the travel restrictions on them, they poured
Yes.
anywhere they could go. Poland, Slovakia, Romania, hell, even Russia, Belarus, like any border they could cross, they were crossing. And if I were in their position, I would do the exact same thing. If I were in the position of a man who was the age who couldn't leave, I'd be trying like hell to get across really any. I would probably cross the minefields on the border of Belarus before I got deployed anywhere in the front lines. You probably have a better chance of surviving at that rate. But with all that being said, nobody will want to return to Ukraine. No, nobody in any appreciable manner will want to return to Ukraine. The ones in the West seem to have built comfortable lives for themselves, whether it is by their own effort or just simple use of the welfare state, which does tend to be the case in a lot of places, and from what I've heard. But once again, I would say that places with a more established Ukrainian diaspora, they have managed to build a significant life for themselves. I mean, and it's been almost 4 years since the start of the war. There's probably people who are pretty well settled, probably have citizenship or residency in whatever country they've ended up in. Uh, Needless to say, the millions that ended up in Russia from Ukraine, Ukrainian nationals who ended up in Russia, which I think is probably just as much, if not more, than ended up in the European Union. Now, granted, like I said, that includes a lot of the occupied territories, and that people who lived in places that are now part of the Russian Federation, of course, have the liberty to travel to other parts of Russia. If somebody from Mariupol or really any of these cities or any of these territories that are taken, they can go all the way to Vladivostok if they wanted. There's very little stopping them beyond their own means. Unlike Ukraine, which once again has internal travel restrictions, which is under a state of martial law across the entire country. But there is going to be nothing to return to. You read the language of the peace agreements, and I'll get into some of Witkoff and Dmitriev's statements on it. They're setting this country up, if I may be so bold to use the term, for a rape of what is left of Ukraine. There is going to be next to nothing left in this country of any usefulness. And I can tell you outright, this is going to be, I think, controversial to the general public, but I think if you're listening to this show, you probably agree. The most prosperous parts of what the country once known as Ukraine will be on the Russian side, okay? The only livable parts of the country that was Ukraine from 1991 to 2025 will be the areas that ended up under the yoke of the Russian oppressors. And it's not even going to be a contest. You can look at the various cities. I mean, I think Melitopol is actually a great example of what I'm talking about because it was an undefended city. They were caught flat-footed. The Russians just swept through there. No fighting took place. It just ended up under Russian occupation.
You have a great memory.
Yeah, I mean, I try to go back and reference things, and that's one of the ones I referenced recently because I like to keep these things fresh. But yeah, Melitopol, for those who recall, will have, once again, it fell without any resistance. Compare that to places in, just say, Western Ukraine, which have been mostly spared Russian bombardment. Who do you think has a higher standard of living? Who do you think has more opportunity in day-to-day life? In terms of average residents, who do you think is doing better right now? And I'm not even saying this as some sort of quote-unquote pro-Russian statement. I'm saying this as a matter of objective reality in terms of material living standards. It is the average person in Melitopol who has a better life than, say, some comparable-sized town in unoccupied Ukraine that's not on the front lines. I apologize, I don't have a counterexample readily available, but I'm sure if you give me time, I could find one, and you could do a one-for-one comparison, or an almost one-for-one comparison. And
maybe Khmelnytsky.
yeah, that is. And I suppose when you compare the amount of strikes from the Russians versus the amount of strikes from the Ukrainians, yeah, living conditions probably are comparable. And I bet I can almost guarantee you life in Melitopol is better than life in Khmelnytsky by a long shot. And I think anyone not blinded by any sort of nationalism or ideological persuasion would agree to that statement. And it's, I'm telling you, and this is not something I came up with. It's something I've heard several people talk about. The state of Ukraine, of quote unquote free Ukraine after the war, these guys who spent 4 years, by the time this war is going to end, over 4 years on the front line, are going to look at the state of their country. They're going to look at the fact that they got played into being cannon fodder for one of the deadliest wars since World War II. And much like these quote-unquote Afghan allies we brought to the United States, they're probably going to turn to violence, they're going to turn to crime, they're going to turn to terrorism, because that's really all they're going to feel that they have left. And that, unfortunately, a lot of these diasporic communities that are well established in the West might become magnets for that. And those are the ones who don't get swept up by the intelligence agencies and sent to foment whatever the next war, whatever the next imperial project is. Because those guys, there's going to be plenty of jobs for them. But a lot of these guys, they're going to be listless. They're going to be displaced from their own countries. And that's not even including the ones who, I know this is more of a throwaway line than anything serious, but there's probably going to be a non-insignificant amount, to use that term once again, of these guys who fought for Ukraine who end up siding with Russia because they feel stabbed in the back by the West, in which case they're not entirely wrong. I'm not saying they're entirely right, but they're not entirely wrong either. And it creates a very volatile situation, and that this land is going to be the black hole of Europe. And I think, frankly, Europe, the West, the Americans, are satisfied with what's left of "quote unquote" sovereign Ukraine being a black hole that nobody wants to touch because it creates a barrier between them and the Russians.
Yes, and maybe to um, give not additional context, but and not hopefully wander off.
No, please do.
Um, when you consider, I mean, I completely agree with everything you're saying. And the Europeans aren't changing their tune either. So, of course, Zelensky today and the day before mentioned that they're not going to withdraw from Donetsk. They will keep fighting, which is predictable. Everybody always expected um, him to eventually say that, even though if at the start it seemed unlikely. Um, just to put things into historical perspective, the EU has never given loans anywhere remotely to the proportion they've given Ukraine to a non-EU country. And almost all of it is military. So that tells you they're not, this can only escalate
Yes.
because it will mean it will be prolonged. Well, the prolongation of this war will also mean a greater likelihood of escalation.
Yes. And I do want to continue your point in terms of the amount of just the amount of loans, the amount of aid they've given to Ukraine, and contrast that to, I think, Serbia, which has been an EU candidate country for over 20 years, and the humiliating song and dance they've had to do to get a fraction from the European Union what Ukraine gets just for existing. Uh,
Yeah.
what looking at it internationally, and
That
what
tells you what it's like to be a proxy warrior.
exactly, exactly. And we'll talk about the seizure of the assets and investor confidence in Europe, and just um, the disaster that we seem to be barreling on without any breaks, and just in terms of the global economy, global stability. But before we get into that, I did want to touch a little bit on the Witkoff Dmitriev meetings that have taken place over
Mm-hmm.
the past couple weeks. So this one comes from Ushakov. This is his report of Witkoff's meeting with Putin. Just a few bullet points on this. They're ready to agree with some things. Something provoked criticism, but a useful discussion took place. As vague as ever. Meeting discussed the absence of the U.S. plan for resolving the conflict in Ukraine, not specific proposals. No compromise has been found yet. A meeting between the leaders of Russia and the U.S. is not currently planned, as we've obviously seen. The parties see huge prospects for cooperation. Once again, this should all sound very familiar. Putin stated Moscow may agree to some aspects of the U.S. plan for Ukraine, but something provokes criticism from the Russian side. I love these Ushkov readouts. They're always it's you always know what to expect.
Yeah.
Moscow received 4 more documents in addition to the original 28-point peace plan. The meeting provided opportunity to discuss ways to further resolve the Ukraine crisis, discuss prospects for achieving a long-term peaceful settlement in Ukraine. The parties stated their readiness to continue working together to achieve a settlement. Representatives of the U.S. president conveyed greetings and wishes from Trump to Putin. Putin conveyed his greetings to Trump through Witkoff and a number of political signals. The possibility of a meeting between Putin and Trump will depend on the progress being made towards a settlement. To continue on, just the general delegation's activities in the past couple weeks. A brief readout when it comes to the U.S. Ukraine talks that took place in Germany. Those are the ones that Mertz walked out of, who excused himself from, excuse me. The meeting in Berlin between Zelensky, Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and delegations of the United States and Ukraine lasted over 5 hours. Representatives held in-depth discussions regarding 20-point peace plan. Once again, that they add a few points here, take off a few there. whatever it's going to be, economic agendas and more. A lot of progress was made. They will meet again tomorrow morning, and that was on December 15th. So the follow up meetings took place after that. But the read up from the Miami meeting, which happened, I believe, over this weekend, this is directly from a statement directly from Witkoff. Over the past 3 days in Florida, the Ukrainian delegations have held a series of productive talks and constructive meetings with American and European partners. The Ukrainian delegation included Secretary for National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov, the former defense minister and noted Tatar, and the Chief of General Staff of the Armed Forces, uh, General Andriy Khnatov. The American delegation. Let's pronounce that properly. Gnatov. Let's get that all corrected there. The American delegation included Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and the White House staff member Josh Grunbaum. I wonder if that's a German or Yiddish surname, but who knows? Who knows?
Wasn't Fink from BlackRock there?
Y-
I saw.
yes.
He may not have been at that particular meeting, but he's been in some of these meetings
He did.
recently in
He
December.
did meet with Witkoff a couple weeks back. So yes, that did happen. Key European national security advisors also joined for the discussion to align on a shared strategic approach between Ukraine, the United States, and Europe. Separate constructive meetings were also held in a U.S.-Ukraine format, which during the four key documents were focused on further development of a 20-point plan, once again repeating what they had said in Berlin, aligning a position on multilateral security guarantees frameworks, aligning the position of a U.S. security guarantee framework for Ukraine, NATO without NATO, as it were, and further developments of an economic and prosperity plan. Particular attention was given to discussing the timelines and sequencing of events. Europe remains fully committed to achieving. Ukraine remains fully committed to achieving a just and sustainable peace. I love all the buzzwords they use; they're just wonderful. Our priority is to stop the killing, ensure guaranteed security, and create conditions for Ukraine's recovery, stability, and long-term prosperity. What a joke that is! And peace must not only be a cessation of hostilities, but also a dignified foundation for a stable future. In which case, I might be letting my biases show. At this point, the most dignified future for Ukraine is the Russians take everything up to Zakarpattia. That honestly, that would be the least shameful option out of all of this. A complete conquest and annexation would be the least shameful outcome for Ukraine. And you know what? It would at least give them a national mythology that's based in some reality to play on there. I don't know. Maybe they can sell Transcarpathia back to Hungary. Perhaps. Uh, there's a lot they can do there. But as somebody who has been, let's just say, I'm not necessarily going to say I like Witkoff, but I don't hate him either. I think he's one of the more level-headed voices, but ultimately I know because the people he's working for, he's never going to make any significant headway or any meaningful change. But I feel like I'm just repeating what I've been saying for the past year here.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, I'm so glad you went through this and you brought up so many salient points. Uh, this peace plan has a lot of non-negotiables with Russia. I wonder about its seriousness. I think Trump definitely wants some kind of resolution to this war. I think he wants it to happen.
For
But like
ulterior
his first
motives, which
term,
we will get into.
yeah, but like his first term, he's not in charge. And we often talk about, well, why would Russia agree to this? They're close to taking all of the Donbass. They have over 20% of the country now. The Ukraine, the rapidity of the gains has been such that only 2022 were Russians gaining as much territory. Uh, they've gained the figure I saw this week was they gained 6,000 square kilometers this year as opposed to 4,000 square kilometers last year. So, that's 10,000 square kilometers in 2 years. And we've been watching the gain by the Russians. But to return to the point, what's in it for the Russians? Well, I mean, you could argue for the architects of this war and for the investors like BlackRock, um, what's the incentive to stop this war now? I don't think there is one, because as long as Russians and Ukrainians keep dying and this war drags on, they're willing to make some of the sacrifices. Now, America is making the least amount of sacrifices because it's given almost no aid except by, well, I mean, the European Union buying military hardware from the Americans and then giving it to the Ukrainians. So it's almost all of the European Union right now, which I guess could dovetail nicely into talking about what happened with the decision to freeze the so-called frozen assets.
Yes, and who would have thought that Belgium was the Zigger capital of Western Europe? How dare, how dare the Belgians do not
Yeah.
nuke their economy to please Ukraine?
Yeah.
It is a pillaging, it is a shameful action, it is a betrayal. Uh, Belgium should be genuflecting. You know, Bart de Wever should be genuflecting before Zelensky right now, begging him to still be part of Europe, and he should be grateful that they're not taking Belgium's seat in the European Union and transferring it to Ukraine right now. He should be on his knees thanking his lucky stars that that is not what is occurring right now because of his shameful pro-Russian actions. Despite the fact that he said, "Oh yeah, we can keep bankrolling Ukraine, we can give a loan to them," but I think it might be unwise to use the Russian frozen assets to back up such a loan or to seize those assets and give them to Ukraine, because I think it might kill international investor confidence that because of the sorry state of this continent's economy, we desperately rely on. But
Right.
to quote DeVever in his own words, uh, support for Kiev should be from the EU's own resources, not frozen Russian assets, because Putin's money isn't free. Uh, like any alternative scheme, since these funds will inevitably have to be withdrawn from other sources. So, really, a very rational statement of self
Hmm.
interest, and it makes you a pro Russian puppet. But
Yeah.
we've.
And we should mention that other countries were opposed. People have mentioned Czech and Slovakia, but also Hungary,
Belgium, Bulgaria, obviously Hungary,
yeah,
Slovakia,
and
Malta,
Italy.
Italy. Where it's an odd bunch of nations, but it's ones who really understand what's going on. And I have more news about each of these respective nations coming up. But they have all coalesced around opposition to this bizarre plan. However, Ursula has brought down the
Mm.
ultimatum saying either the frozen assets pay for it or we as Europe pay for it. Which is funny enough that that's what the Belgians were settled on. And
Yeah,
I,
she's trying to make it sound like that's what she was saying all along.
I
It's so misleading.
but then they have this bizarre scheme. I don't quite understand it, but let me try to explain what it means. Where they're not going to use the Russian frozen assets, but they devised a way where, based on I guess Ursula's ultimatum, we're pretty much we'll have the frozen assets, and there'll be like war reparations once we get the Russians to finally cave in and accept all of our demands. But in the meantime, Europe will foot the bill, which means mostly Germany will exploit its already flailing economy even more in order to continue on bankrolling Europe. It's incoherent. It's bizarre. It is the death, really the death throes of a continental system that is on its last leg, that is really only still being propped up because of this war. And that's part of the reason why Europe does want this war to go on until Russia collapses, because they have staked their, well, I should say the European Union, because they have staked their entire reason for being, their entire existence, in both the success in the Ukrainian conflict and the subjugation of Russia. And that's what it's been since 2022 at the latest. You could say it goes back a little bit further before that into the late 2010s. Maybe since the Crimea annexation, it's gone towards that. But if this does not have a favorable outcome, uh, it's going to spark revolution on the continent, one way or another. The current elite will not be able to maintain the position in the same way that they have. Now, much like many of the post-Soviet elite across the last to Eastern Europe, I'm sure the wiser ones can find ways to integrate themselves into a new system if it were to arise. But right now, you have the Macrons, the Merzes, the Starmers, even though UK isn't part of the EU, but effectively still is. The Ursulas, all of the regular cast of characters we love to come on here and talk about every few weeks. They are all sweating very nervously because they know their entire career, their entire legacy is tied up in all of this. And they're willing to march this continent into, if I may be so bold, a suicidal war if it means maintaining that.
Yeah, I mean, they almost have no other recourse. I think there's a kind of disingenuousness from a lot of commentators, geopolitical commentators, about the apparent mystery as to why Europe is doing this. And I've said it before, but and I know it's tiresome, but if I could just reiterate one more time, remember that the Europeans, including Germany, did not want this war when it started. They did not want Nord Stream to be destroyed. I'm not talking about the pesky countries plus Poland. I'm talking about like the big
This,
players,
yeah, the serious
the
countries in Europe. The
the
French didn't
serious
want it. The
countries,
Italians didn't want it. Perfidious Albion, of
the
course, wanted it,
Germans.
but that's a different
Yes,
story.
yes. So um, they didn't want it. It happened. Biden was unrelenting, and of course destroyed the pipeline system, which meant it would, of consequence, after dragging um, Germany's industrial sector down, it would have a profound effect on all the other sectors. And that's exactly what is happening, even to some extent. Britain itself has been ill affected by this, by secondary or tertiary effects. So, uh, I don't know what to say. They, um, in a way, they see no other choice. If we presume that, the idea that um, the investments by European elites have shifted from Switzerland to the US and offshore banks in the Caribbean, where they get more returns, then you still have to give them credit for sticking up at least for the concerns of their people. But I think at somewhere along the way, the Americans convinced them that there's nothing to worry about, that the people are malleable, and there's nothing that they're going to do. There's nothing. You're overthinking it. You're afraid for no reason, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe that is what's happened. Because it was slow. It took at least a year, but here we are. They are willing to follow this role that the Americans have carved out for them, and they have to go for broke or they crash, and they're just not willing to crash yet.
Yes, and I will say before I get into some of the pirate activities on both the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, I do want to say that going into 2026, we're going to see um, really a all eyes are going to be on Hungary. Let me just put it this way: the Hungarians are coming up on an election.
Mm,
Orban look, it's a small country. It's 10 million people. It's landlocked. It has little influence in the European Union beyond its veto power and its, I guess, somewhat close relationship with the Russians. Every European institution, they've been trying to do it, but every European institution will monomaniacally dedicate itself to overthrowing Orban in 2026. Even if he wins the
Yes.
election, they're going to try to do what they did in Romania, overturn it, have some European court come in and say that that's not very democratic of you, etc., etc. They are going to pull out all the stops, all of the classic and new color revolution tactics to really destroy the symbolic head of the I guess you could say counter elite in Europe. And I don't want to heap too much praise upon Orban because I know like every politician there are those things that are very unsavory about him. However, what he represents is that counter elite, is that alternative vision for Europe, which is part of the reason why they're doing what they're doing to the AfD in Germany, um, Le Pen in France with her court decisions. Like I said, think what you will about any of these individuals or parties, but symbolically, what they purport to be, are counter elites to a European system that is charging headfirst into continental destruction. And that Orban has been the longest standing and most consistent voices out of all of these parties, all these individuals, and they will dedicate everything they can to him, for him to fall out of power, and on top of that, probably face legal consequence. They will probably try to drum up some charges based on his activity. Which, yes, there's always a corruption charge that can be found with any successful politician. That's just the name of the game. And unfortunately, this might be my pessimism speaking. I think they're going to succeed in this color
Yeah.
revolution. I think Peter Magyar, unfortunately, is going to be the next prime minister of Hungary. That Fidesz, as a political party, is going to be effectively liquidated, and soon after that, they'll probably try to do the same in Slovakia. And unless these countries really, and that's not even a guarantee considering how Brexit went, but unless these countries are willing to completely divorce themselves from the European Union and adopt, dare I say, a pro-Russian foreign policy, nothing's going to change. In that, in retrospect, looking at the state of Hungary, perhaps it would have been wiser to push for an exit of the European Union back in the late 2010s, early 2020s. Now, of course, there was no way to know things would grow this intensely this quickly, but being part of the European Union and even leaving the European Union in the way, say, the British did, does not divorce you from this. I'm just going to say it, this death cult, this continent-wide death cult, and that the only way is to completely escape. And Vucic, who's in his own hot water, better be looking at this. Better be looking at his so-called European ambitions and realizing this is what they want to do to my nation. And any nation considering joining the European Union, any nation that is within the system, needs to be looking at this. And any serious counter elite needs to be developing a an exit strategy. No matter what it looks like, they need to be developing an exit strategy, and that Orban is going to be the symbol of failed European populism. I'm not saying that because I want him to fail, but I'm saying that because I think he is almost guaranteed to fail, and it will truly be miraculous if he manages to weather the coming storm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the thing I worry about, and of course I worry about the same thing with respect to Russia, because they once Putin is gone, how much unity are we still going to see after this war is over? I think the end of the war will probably also mean the end of Putin's presidency. It's kind of a very uncertain future. I wouldn't. We've seen during this war places in the North Caucasus that have had like two incidents where there's been mass killings of policemen. Now it is, these non-Russian, non-Slavic groups.
Yes, it was in Dagestan where I think they had the church
Yeah,
and mosque, not church and mosque, but church and synagogue attack back last summer. I think that was July 24. Uh,
yes, but there were also those policemen, like over a dozen killed. And I remember that some of the policemen who eventually overtook the terrorists, just like one guy was dead, the other guy was wounded, but they just finished them off. They were just, disgusted. And so I think like we haven't seen that kind of destabilization. I imagine that will uptick and it'll feed on a kind of, let's say, uh, there's a kind of malaise and a dissatisfaction with some issues around national identity that are present in Russia. Some of them predate the war. That is one thing that has to be considered. And I don't know who it is that's going to keep um, the country together. I don't mean to. I might be overstating it,
No,
right?
I agree with what you're saying. I'm not saying, for example, I think with Hungary with Orban that's a done deal, but with Russia it's very uncertain that if the right person does not come to power, then yes, that runs a real risk of happening. But I don't think it is a foregone conclusion that Putin will not have a, I guess you could say, worthy successor, and that there's still a very good possibility that there's somebody who can manage this intricate web of Russian politics. But I will say, to bolster your concern about the situation in the Caucasus, you have in the North Caucasus what you had talked about with the attacks on the police officers, with the terrorist attacks. But also, I think concerningly, you have the solidification of Azerbaijan as the predominant country in the South Caucasus now, right there in the pocket of Turkey, in the pocket of Israel. That could very well be used as a launch point for the American empire. And that depending on whatever kind of money or weapons or political movements they decide to launder through, say, a country like Azerbaijan, that could very easily be fed north into Russia, into these places like Dagestan, into these places like Chechnya. And when you have the combination of Putin retiring and also Kadyrov in Chechnya retiring, what's the face of Chechnya going to look like after, say, Kadyrov, who, in large part, things have been kept peaceful there, relatively peaceful there, because of the personal relationship of those two men? What's it going to look like in the future? Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
So you have that, and you also have, to return to Azerbaijan, which is the real linchpin in all of this, you have the Turkish gateway into Central Asia now. And depending on how much Turkey wants to lean on the West, once again, they can project that power into Central Asia, and they can really raise hell there, which is going to be yet another concern for Russia. And that's on top of also the number of Central Asian diaspora inside of Russia who will, when the chips are down, probably side with their own countries, their own ethnicities over the Russian state. Where I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not saying any of this is a foregone conclusion, but these are the very real post-Ukraine war security risks that Russia needs to pay attention to. Yes, Europe does seem to be marching on this war path, and I think what is really the saving grace there is the fact that Europe simply does not have the industrial capacity or really the population makeup to be waging a major industrial war. And I'm not saying there's no way around that, but I'm saying that is a very fortunate stumbling block that is there. But the way I see it, the security concerns from Russia are going to come from the south. And then there's also the big question mark over Iran. What's the future of that going to be? Will a Russia friendly government be able to remain in power in Iran with all the agitation for regime change? You already see the Israelis freaking out, as they do at the end of every year. But once again, you see them wanting to continue the 12-day war despite their poor performance in the 12-day war. But that's aside the point. But once again, that I would say post Ukraine war, what I think everyone is ignoring, and not even deliberately, but just because Ukraine has consumed so much attention, that there is a massive gaping security situation on Russia's southern flank.
Mm-hmm. And they're lining all this up with all the goings on that happen in Armenia. Like that's why Armenia can absorb all of this because their leadership thinks it's worth it. They think it's worth maybe sacrificing some Armenians for this. I don't know. It's something that we'll have to wait and
Yeah.
see.
Now, these are predictions I would like to be wrong about, but these are things that you need to keep your eye on. Like I said, none of these. Unlike a lot of what I say, I don't think any of this is foregone. Whereas, for example, I think a lot of the stuff in Europe is more or less inevitable. But this is a much cloudier picture. So we'll, over the next few years, have to keep our eyes on that. That'll also depend on Washington's foreign policy. Who's going to succeed Trump? Are they going to be more monomaniacally focused on Russia or China? Because I think that's going to be the big foreign policy divide. Are you a take down Russia first or take down China first person? There's not really going to be any, say, sane non-interventionist or sane foreign policy restraint types. That's going to, I mean, not that there are right now, but whatever little hope of that, whatever little pretense of that is going to be completely gone. But I suppose when it comes to provoking hotspots around Russia, we should talk about the interesting activities in both the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea with the attacks on the tankers. So naturally, the Ukrainian drones are striking Russian vessels in the Black Sea. And funny enough, Trump, who is right now trying to wage his own wars of high seas piracy off the coast of Venezuela, is condemning the Ukrainians for doing such because he wants to put a neat little bow in this Ukraine conflict. He wants this to be out of sight, out of mind. If it has to be done, it's Europe's problem, etc., which by extent makes it the United States' problem, but trying to think about the logistics of that too much because we got to focus on Venezuela, which I'll talk about later in the show because that there's a lot to cover with that. But I think more concerningly, beyond what's happening in the Black Sea right now, because what's happening in the Black Sea, this goes all the way back to 2022. This is old news in many ways. But what's happening in the Baltic Sea is more concerning because now you have the Shadow Fleet being armed with quote unquote mercenaries, which has put the Swedish Navy in a state of panic. Say, and this is coming from Sweden's head of Navy operations. We have seen and received information there are people in military uniforms on some of these Shadow Fleet vessels. Says the once again the operator, the head of Swedish Navy operations, Marco Petkovic. Oh, interesting. I guess they found some. I don't know. That
Yeah, he's a Serb.
sounds Croatian to me.
Uh,
But yeah, they found some diasporoid who's willing to be head of the Swedish Navy. That's not shocking. In addition, the Baltic Fleet of the Russian Navy has significantly expanded its presence in the Gulf of Finland and the Black Sea, near adjacent waterways. Petkovic also said that the Russian naval presence has become permanent and now extends to a significant part of the Baltic Sea, etc., etc., etc. And now, most recent reports, the Swedish Coast Guards have boarded the Russian vessel Adler in the Baltic Sea, carrying out inspections. And Adler is part of the sanctioned M Leasing LLC, which is a logistical firm tied to the Russian MOD, etc., etc. But right now, we're seeing similar to what the U.S. was doing with Iranian ships in the Gulf. You now have NATO military forces boarding and inspecting Russian ships in European waters, which, once again, this is a blatant provocation. They're trying to get the Russians to respond
yep.
to these very arbitrary actions regarding regarding their trade vessels. Once again, the super scary Shadow Fleet. So they can say, "Oh, look, the Russians are issuing military threats against us because we were harassing their trade vessels," and I mean that's a surefire way to start a war is to start harassing trade routes both on land and on sea, which is something that we directly said would happen. And we're also seeing the so-called division of labor play out. If you want to go back to that, Brian Berletta talks in detail about this, how Western foreign policy objectives are divided between Europe and the United States. Like I said, he could articulate it better than I can just in the short time right here. But yeah, you have NATO forces because Sweden, yes, is now a NATO country since 2023, openly harassing Russian vessels, which in any other time, and maybe even in our time, is probably the surefire way to start a conflict. And I mean, there's really no getting away
Yeah.
around that. But of course, the Swedes are doing it, so they have to fight the war. The Americans, they can dump some arms shipments. They won't have to get involved right away. They can wait until Russia goes through a slugfest with the Europeans before we come in and finish the war because we still have the best military in the world, et cetera, despite the fact that uh, even despite our almost $1 trillion in spending, we still have massive supply shortages. We still are not up to what we were even 30 years ago. And that even with Trump's quote unquote great revival and how we're going to have the Department of War and how things are going to be great again, the American military is still in quite. I mean, it's a powerful organization, don't get me wrong. It can still do a lot of damage. But it's in a sorry state compared to what it was at its peak, say, in the 1980s and 1990s. And they think that they're going to fight a war against the seasoned Russians with this. And
Yeah.
that's not even including the question of nuclear weapons or strategic arms, which that even presents a problem because over the past 30 years the Russians have developed certainly a qualitative advantage, I would say, if not and they maintain their quantitative advantage in strategic arms. And we're coming up with the expiration of the START treaty, which opens the avenue for yet another arms race, not only with the Russians but also the Chinese at this point. And in many ways, and I'll return to this point, Donald Trump, as we had said back in 2024, despite, let's just say, my foolish endorsement of him in retrospect, is being set up to fall on his own sword. That he is going to do these blatantly provocative things, and then it's his legacy that's going to be tarnished. It's him that who's going to be the one of the reason that we're in this state, despite the fact that this is all simple continuity of policy going back decades. But
Hmm.
Donald Trump is going to be the face of the man who turned the U.S. Navy into an organization that seizes vessels, that arbitrarily acts without it, that completely broke down the global system of trade and the global security system. And like I said, it's he's certainly not blameless in all this, but he is yet a continuation of decades of U.S. policy. But he's going to be that face next to the story in the history books where global sea trade broke down, and that's going to be on him. And you can question the merits of is the current global trade system good? Not well. Point being is I can agree with that. I can agree that that's gone too far. But when the self-proclaimed global guarantor of free trade becomes the world's largest private organization, there's not much getting around that, and that things are going to
Yeah.
get very nasty very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of a pitfall that some of the European countries don't want to see happen with regards to the Russian foreign assets. This claimed neutrality, this claimed benevolence from the leader of the world, it's a dire situation. Obviously, this has been building up for decades. China's economic rise, America's dependency on China. It will be very hard for America to fight any long sustained war, primarily because, uh, short of escalating to a nuclear war, many of the rare earths that are necessary for military production by the US are coming in from China. 90% of all refining is happening in China, or it's some extreme amount.
You could also go back
Y-
to
y-
2024 and find reports that we were importing TNT from China. That very
right.
basic thing you need to make just really any explosives, any sort of bomb, that even just down to the most basic things, artillery shells that a military would need. And that we had just assumed that China would be satisfied in perpetuity being the West's just factory, and that they'd be satisfied in the middle income area and just cranking out consumer and even industrial goods until the end of time. And we're seeing the consequence of that. And once again, I say this as somebody who is very skeptical of all the hawkishness developing around China right now, but just getting down to the basic concept of all, how supremely stupid it was to turn over key manufacturing sectors to another major country, let alone any other country at all.
Yeah, I mean, and
I mean, the reason they thought this is that the Chinese would be too stupid. They wouldn't be like it's all this like it's these dumb presumptions.
Yeah, it's somebody who read Fukuyama and based their entire worldview on it once. That's what it feels like. Like
Yeah.
it's all over that. The American Empire shall last 10,000 years, last until the sun burns out. But and we're
This is why China is like as an ancient empire, even if it's not the oldest, it is of course one of the oldest civilizations. This is why like yes, it went through periods where, the Mongols, the Manchurians, but all those people were absorbed, and in a sense, they became Chinese rather than the Chinese becoming Manchurians or Mongols, right? That's the extent of his cultural gravity, and um, the presumption that whatever America was so unique and so unseen in the world, without any precedent, that it would just overcome all of this, and that these people just they're not as clever. I mean, they didn't write the American Constitution, did they? These insane presumptions, and that they would never figure this out. It's hubris. I know a lot of times I have difficulty myself believing all of the decisions that seem their basis is entirely hubristic that the Western leaders, both in Europe and in North America, have been making. But a lot of it is, when you look at it in a historical context, it is.
yeah, there's no way around it. It and
I
I
mean,
don't
the
know.
pickle they're in is literally because of that.
Yeah, and I don't know. Maybe it's easy to sit here with our hindsight, but I would think that anyone with any strategic sense, any understanding of world history, would be able to see these things happen. Or perhaps
Hmm.
I don't know. Perhaps that's the curse of humanity, where we always fall victim to some sort of hubris, and that we always
Yeah,
are.
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to agree that it's just something inbuilt in us because the state of this world, we are imperfect beings, and that we and I will say that a lot of people talk about theories of history, cyclical versus linear. I think in many ways it can be described that humans are prone to the same flaws no matter who we are, no matter what time period, and that it'll reach a certain point and our hubris will always be our undoing. And that's not unique to the West. That's not unique to the American Empire.
It's not.
That's every great civilization. I mean, there's a reason why, uh, say, the great empires of history no longer exist. So many of them no longer exist. Some are better at staving that off than others. Some are better at recovering from such a fall than others. I think, for example, China, which has managed to survive all these millennia, have learned how to recover from their falls quite well. But it's, I mean, that's just once again, it's the trap that we'll fall into really until the end of time, because I think that's just the way things are. I'm not saying that we shouldn't
Yeah.
try to prevent that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to learn from those mistakes. That we shouldn't try to correct things where we can. But in many ways, it is an inevitability that I think that we all have to be painfully aware of. But speaking of faltering, collapsing, I suppose we could talk a little bit about the sorry state of Europe's economy and just wrap up some of this European news
Hmm. Hmm.
while we have it. So, I think the biggest economic news out of Europe is Volkswagen is cutting tens of thousands of jobs.
Yes.
One of the flagship industries of Germany. So you have the tens of thousands of people it employs, and then the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of other people who are employed by industries that support the auto industry, and that is all just being it's being imploded because once again, lack of cheap energy. The 1-2 punch of denuclearization, and then the loss of Russian energy, and that within an 11-year period, because the Germans started to shut down their nuclear plants after Fukushima. That was 2011. They started to take those offline, combined with the combination of having the plug of Russian gas pulled in 2022. They have not been able to adapt. They've not been able to recover. And even at this point, like the French, if they were to revive their nuclear program, that still doesn't solve the crisis of energy. And one of the big reasons for that is because Germany does not have native uranium stockpiles. They would need to get those through Russia. They would need to get those through Kazakhstan. They would need to get those through somewhere in West Africa, which, as we saw with the coup in what country was that had the coup? How could I forget? Niger had the coup, but
Yes, yes.
yeah, with that, that supply of nuclear fuel is also hamstrung, where it's a very unenviable position where the logic move would be that continental cooperation between the Germans and the Russians, which is anathema to the American Empire, which is one of the primary reasons for the war in Ukraine in the first place. We could iterate this again and again, but because of that, we had the perfect man in office in Germany to correct these situations. Friedrich Merz, who is now once again, I'm not somebody who likes to pro clutch over history, but I think it's funny when the Chancellor of Germany starts invoking Munich in regard to a
Yeah.
peace deal in Ukraine. And I remember just I don't know 6-7 months ago, where he was very much trying to ingratiate himself to Trump and Trump's peace efforts. Look, here's your grandfather's birth certificate. Here's the original German document. It's all nicely framed and whatever. And Trump is such a great guy. He's working towards peace in Europe. And then he gets back to Germany, 6 months later, 7 months later, and he's ranting and raving about how we can't appease Putin. Appeasement is how my country was able to conquer half the continent 80 years ago, and it is amazing how they play into it, where it was this taboo for such a long time. But the minute we need to gin up any sort of national pride, suddenly we can be proud of our histories again. Even though, I mean, that's not what that is. Make no mistake about it. But you see this narrative again, or they'll soften up on certain things, or suddenly nationalism is allowed now, so long as you charge to a minefield in eastern Ukraine. Funny how all that works. But once again, Merz goes on about these delusions of grandeur about how Germany's going to reindustrialize. We're going to be the continental shield. Funny enough, it is geopolitically the same rhetoric that the mid-century Germans would have used. It's just that the ideologies and the leaders and all the names are flipped around, where Germany's the continental shield against the the despotic power of the East. Now, he's doing that in service of global rainbow liberalism and not German National Socialism. But you'll notice how the narratives that you can plug and play with them. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
But speaking of taking the bait, you have Poland, who has began to deploy anti-personnel mines along the border with Kaliningrad and Belarus. Which, look, I mean, I understand minefields. I understand their purpose in warfare, but especially when you're not at war, these things are going to kill more civilians than they ever are soldiers, unless a war does break out almost immediately. That you're going to get people who live in these border regions who get killed by these minefields, and you still see this in parts of, particularly Bosnia. I think it's still really bad about it, where you have these minefields that are still active. That once again, they just end up killing random people and serve really no purpose, and that's what we're looking at right now. And all in the name of preventing the Russian horde from re-entering Europe. And then also, finally, I'll show you the reason why they intervened so heavily in the Romanian election. I sent this graphic to you about the security and assistance training for Ukraine, where Germany is going to establish logistics enabling nodes, as they call them, in Romania and in Poland, showing how Germany is really going to take up the mantle of supplying the war in Ukraine. And that these will be NATO Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine, NSTAU. General Mike Keller, he's an American commander in Germany through NATO, of course, announced that these will be set up in 2026, and that the one in Romania will be set up in 2026. And then in 2025, they sent about 220,000 tons of military aid, involving 9,000 trucks, 1,800 railway cars, 500 aircraft, loaded with weapons, ammunition, and other equipment via Poland. And that the primary task of the second node will train NATO servicemen in logistics in real conditions, as well as to establish another logistics center in the southern part of the eastern flank of the Russian direction. You see, they're already calling it the Russian direction. They're already priming the pump of what these battlefronts are going to be called when their 2030 war, or whenever they decide to have it, comes. And these nations, once again, Poland and Romania, nations that I have no ill will against whatsoever, but they are taking the bait, and that they are the next Ukraine, and that these are the nations where you're going to have 1 million+ casualties of young men who are thrown in vans to fight the exact same losing battle Ukraine did until they can exhaust Russia. I know I've been hammering on this for the past several months. George Soros, Open Society Foundation, 1993. They lay this out directly. Either Russia
Yeah.
cooperates or we send meat wave after meat wave of European nations until they collapse. And
And this predates some of the things that Putin did once he was in power. Like the British Rothschilds. I mean, I know they're not British, but I'm saying their families exist
the
in
British
Germany,
based
Britain,
Rothschilds.
France. Yes. So they had a 20% share in Russia's, I think, largest oil company, Lukos. Of course, Putin nationalized that, and they lost their 20% share. That's one of the reasons why Britain is so interested, the UK is so interested in defeating Russia. I mean, it was already there before, but this is, you know, but it's interesting that you bring up Soros preceding this by nearly a decade. And so it was already outlined well ahead. Please go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sure they had this outline before the collapse of the Soviet Union. When they saw the
Yeah.
writing on the wall, they drafted these agreements. But once again, you're going to get these nations, Poland and Romania. You know, I've actually spent a brief amount of time in Romania. It was a day trip from my vacation to Serbia. I would recommend it if you can go there before a war breaks out. But yeah, this is why they stopped Georgescu. This is why they intervened so heavily in the politics of these nations, because they need these countries to be the next wave in the attack, and that
Yeah.
I mean, look, the elites in the West, they don't give a damn about their nations, let alone about these little Chihuahua nations in Eastern Europe. Like, I mean, that's beyond the question. And I mean, how many times have you heard Western politicians directly come out and say, "Well, I'm glad the Ukrainians are killing and dying, so we don't have to do it." Pretty much saying, "Yeah, you are all a bunch of cannon fodder. We don't view you as human lives worth preserving, and that we view you simply as war machines who are going to act completely on our behalf. And then when it's all said and done, your nation is going to be pillaged by us. We're going to leave half your land in the hands of the Russians, in which case the people under Russian occupation, as I said earlier, will probably be living better lives. And hey, maybe if you get lucky, you can work for the CIA or whatever and provoke the next war." That's the promise for these nations that get drawn into these wars. And I will implore anyone in Poland, in Romania who listen to the show. I don't advocate any sort of political action. Once again, I trust people to make their own decisions for this. But I will advocate, be aware of what they're trying to pull on you. And I think if you're listening to this show, not to talk up us or our audience too much, you probably have some idea of what's going on. But I will say, if you live in these nations that border Ukraine, you more than anyone else need to be hyper vigilant about this situation and about the fast one that the entire Western elite is going to be pulling on you.
Yeah. You know, just to give a financial angle to what you said about Soros, but also they were probably planning this ahead of time. I'm going to send you this.
Oh.
So this is how U.S. Treasuries and foreign central banks began to replace their gold reserves,
Oh boy.
right?
This is like early conspiracy Kino. I'm not saying like conspiracy
Yeah.
is inaccurate,
Th-
but yeah,
This
this
is
is
from my golden age, buddy.
yeah, this is like returning to getting down to basics. You know, getting really back to the
Right.
fundamentals of everything we talk about. But here it is.
So imagine you're briefing your president or prime minister in the 80s. The Soviet Union is going to crumble. America is going to go on top. It's unstoppable. You can see where they kind of get close around the early 70s. You know, we have the financial crisis, the British and the French, trying to overcome their dependence on the U.S. dollar by pegging gold. And then you can see in the 80s that there's a separation. It's rocky, but there's a separation building, by 83, 85, where clearly, like, most banks they're investing in sorry, treasuries are slowly climbing up, and gold is still very high. And then you look at, like, if you were looking from 1990 to 1995, 96, so you just witnessed the Soviet Union collapse, and you've been watching something like a 5 to 10 year trend of gold holdings going down in foreign reserves and American treasuries going up. And then mid 90s, first Gulf War, all of that is in the past. Soros is writing this. Fukuyama, it's around the time Fukuyama writes his articles, um, which later become a book. But and you can see the treasuries, although they never quite match what the gold reserves were, and these treasuries are still based on American military power and the petrodollar. They have clearly overtaken gold reserves, and then you're looking at 2023, and now it's going the other way. So now gold has climbed back up above U.S. treasuries. They've defied a roughly a 27 to 30-year trend. It's a big deal. They're thinking about this sort of thing,
Yeah,
and
yeah. This looks like a serious world with serious players again.
yeah.
But yeah, we're gonna keep this one in the archive because I have a feeling it's going to become very useful to reference in the near future here. But I do want to just wrap up a little bit of European news and brief some Middle Eastern news before we get into the stuff about Venezuela. And then I have a couple end show topics. If we have time, we'll get to some of the stuff in Australia and maybe even some of the Epstein stuff. We might have to put that on the shelf, but if we can get to it, we will get to it.
Mhm.
But in terms of just the pillaging of nations across Europe, we turn our attention to Croatia, where Croatia has confirmed its first case of leprosy since
Oh
1993.
my.
And can you guess the reason?
Mm.
Foreign workers from Nepal were
Oh
infected
wow. Yeah.
and brought this in. And that is, I mean, I think they calculated the number of foreign workers in Croatia, and it was something like it was some significant percent of the population. I don't have the number on hand right now, but it seems like Croatia has been getting hit particularly hard when it comes to the migrant workers, similar to what you may have seen in the early 2010s in a Western European nation, where and this is happening all across the Balkans. I've been keeping up with this to a lesser extent in Serbia, and those are your two big ones, and even parts of Bulgaria have had this, but Croatia has been hit particularly hard with this. But on the bright side, Kushner did give up on his idea of trying to build a Trump Tower in Belgrade at the site
Mm.
of the former defense ministry that was, of course, bombed by the Americans during the '99 war. But no nation in Europe is immune from this, and I know that a trap a lot of us, including ourselves, like to fall into in the late 2010s is based country of the day. What country has the right messaging that makes you think, oh, we're the country who actually resists migration. I mean, look, even Orban, who I just spent, I don't know, probably 20 minutes heaping praise on and kind of eulogizing his political career, even he's fallen into the quote unquote legal migrant workers trap. You have people from the subcontinent from East Asia in Hungary right now who work in the kind of jobs that you would expect. Now, I wouldn't say it's to the same scale as a lot of places in Europe or the broader
Right.
Western world, but need we still need to say
It's
that
cause
yes,
for concern.
it is cause for concern, and that is something that even when small, you want to stop it before it becomes what it is in Western Europe or North America or dare I even say Canada, which I think is probably the hardest hit of any of the Western nations when it comes to this kind of
Oh, by a
migration
mile.
policy. And you see this in Poland as well, that even the quote unquote based conservative, the based law and justice party, they've been pretty bad with a lot of these quote unquote legal migrants, and there seems to be really no actionable change against any of that. So, like I said, this is a creeping problem, and I urge everyone to be hyper vigilant about all this. Like I said, I advocate no political action. Number one, because I trust you guys to make your own conclusions and live responsible lives. And number two, I don't want to be on the hook for anything that you do if I'm just being frank about it. But with that being said, like I said, if I encourage one thing, it is hyper vigilance. It's to pay attention to things, and beyond that, you're free to do whatever. And I disavow any illegal or immoral actions you might take. But with that being said, with the necessary disclaimer out of the way on the show, some slightly positive news about Bulgaria is that they've been having mass protests against the adoption of the euro, among other issues. But it does seem like, at least there is, to return to my call for awareness and call for hypervigilance, it does seem there's some of that. And you know what? I wish them the best. I hope they can reverse this disastrous decision, because the euro, it's the economic death knell of these nations in Europe, even for the major players. I mean, part of the reason France is in such an economic nightmare is because of the euro, because they have no potential control over the currency. And just down to the question of sovereignty, if you don't issue your own currency, you're not a country. It's really just that simple. These countries under the euro are effectively under a foreign occupation from Brussels in a web of power that ultimately leads back to Washington, D.C., and the various think tanks and lobby groups therein. The deep state, as it were, of the American Empire. And that's what it all comes down to. I guess this is kind of a funny story, not related to Europe, but something that I suppose seems sane on the surface but is really meaningless. Trump proposed a G7 alternative called the Core Five, consisting of the United States. Okay, I understand that. China, that makes sense. Russia, makes sense. You have the three great powers of the world. Japan, I could reasonably see that. They're still a major player that can punch above their weight. And India.
Oh God.
I mean, yeah, India is. I suppose you could make an argument that they're a major player on the world stage. I wouldn't say they weren't enough to be in a G7 alternative. I'm not that any nation in Europe at this point would, but I mean, it's the most sane thing in a stupid world. Let me just put it that way, which is not a very high bar to clear, but it manages to clear it just barely. So I did want to report on that. To turn our attention to the Middle East, Jelani's doing great things for Syria. He's really living up to his namesake by having the Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs post a map of Syria, excluding the Golan Heights. So that's good.
Yeah.
And I guess
What a win.
Jelani's charm offensive did work, however, because he managed to put some sort of spell on Trump, where Trump is warning Israel not to escalate against Syria. And he issued the statement on December 1st. Once again, you'll see, and I think it's rather disgusting, but Trump and Jelani, it's always very warm and friendly meetings. Remember when you sprayed a little bit of perfume on him? It's like, what,
That was bizarre.
What's a few beheading and terroristic action between friends? That's more or less what he said. But
and also very gay.
I think you might be onto something.
He even tried to spray like some guy in his own administration with it. Oh my God. They were cringing. It's like, oh, we just have to let him do this.
Yeah. It's okay. We'll get the war with Iran eventually. It'll all pay off.
Yeah. The things we have to do.
But yeah, that's most of my
Now,
Syrian...
Netanyahu is scheduled to visit Trump.
Again?
Trump's boss is coming to town. He knows when he's been naughty or nice. The December 29th. And he's going to pitch a new war with Iran. He thinks, Iran is rebuilding its nuclear capabilities all over again. Now, in all fairness, Trump has never said that he thinks Iran is going to have nuclear weapons ready in 2 weeks. But of course, Netanyahu will say that.
I actually heard that
Um,
he cut down. It's going to be Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon in 10 days.
yeah, yes, in 10 days, of course, of course. He's
The
going.
Iranians have gotten rather efficient.
They really have. They're speeding up this process. So yeah, he's going to pitch this idea to Trump. We'll see how well Trump is doing, and of course, Trump's peace plan. He is the peace president. Is going very well in Gaza. 467 dead. Over 200 of them are children, like actual children, not like the migrants. So yeah, yeah, it's
Well,
been a big
it's
success. What
okay
a year.
because peace in Ukraine's coming, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay,
big peace.
that's good. Um, at least we're winning somewhere. You know, it's I maybe Trump really is gay, but
I do have an image of
oh
some of the redacted files if you want to.
oh
Yeah, if you want to share. Well, you say that like it's not really a redacted file, like I'm just being
yeah.
silly. I warn you, I'm not.
Well, no, I
So this
yeah.
is this is one of the redacted. It's semi-redacted.
Yeah. Let me just get this up here. We have
Those are not his eyelashes. Those are his gorgeous eyebrows.
let me get this
That
document
is
up. Uh, so it's taking a minute right here. My computer does not want to cooperate. Uh, so let's get the redact. I blame the window. I blame the Windows update. But here is our redacted file, right here. I have no idea what it could be. We're shot in the dark here. Those would be some nice eyelashes. Like those would be like some very pretty eyelashes if that were the case. But with that being said, we do have a touch more news about Syria, and there's some
Yep.
theatrics in eastern Syria with the international coalition that still exists for some reason. They conducted an assault along with the Iraqi army and the SDF on ISIS, I guess.
Yes,
Something.
because 2 American soldiers were killed and a translator. Now, funnily enough, the killer was also employed um, to work with the Americans.
Imagine
The
that.
last time I saw this was in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Where they've got these guys who are in the military that the U.S. funded, and there's some kind of a breakdown. They're probably unhappy with the direction of the country, and they're going like, "I've got nothing to live for. I guess if I die, I die." And I'm going to take a few Americans with me, and that's what we have.
Yeah, that's great allies we have. I'm really,
Great allies, the best,
I'm
the
really,
best allies.
you know what? I'm just happy that Israel's happy.
Just thank God Israel's happy.
Remember
I
when we were
always worry
supposed to
about
withdraw
Israel.
from Syria like 7 years ago? Remember when Trump ordered that and the generals
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah. And
said
they told him
no?
there's only 900 troops. Let's bring it home. And like then they brag about it in Rolling Stone. This is people in the military who ostensibly have to listen to him and say, no, actually we got about 1900. It's about 1,000 more than Trump thinks there is. I, I mean, why did they publish this in Rolling Stone? Probably because they thought, well, Trump's not going to read it. It's just crazy. It's so loony. Well, I mean, where do you even start?
We didn't know how good we had it with Trump's first term. I'm just gonna come out and say it.
I know. Why did we complain so much?
Yeah, a Trump second term in like from 21 to 2025 would have been really good too. That would have been funny. But I will. This is a complete tangent, but I will reiterate the the worst strategic mistake the Democrats made was not letting Trump just serve out 2 consecutive terms and dealing with all the
Mm.
fallout of the early 2020s. Because Gavin Newsom would probably be president right now if they had just let Trump stay in office. Like
It's a great point.
like they jumped the gun. They got impatient. But we'll see what they can
Mm-hmm.
do come 2028. I'm not optimistic either way. But with all that being said, let's turn to another example of high seas piracy, where the U.S. has raided a cargo ship headed to Iran from China. So we're already getting a rating of at least
And they raided a Chinese ship that's actually not that is legal.
yes. And this happened near Sri Lanka, so just in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And we're seeing right now the pressure really coming down. We saw this, like I said, in 2019. The U.S. was routinely seizing Iranian vessels. But now
Mm-hmm.
it's expanded to Venezuelan ships, ships going to Venezuela, Chinese ships going to Iran. It never really stopped with the Iranian vessels. And now they're having their European proxies seize Russian vessels. And we'll talk more about the stuff with Venezuela in just a minute here. But I did want to get into some schizo bait where Israel's Heritage Foundation has named Trump the Prince of Peace.
Oh God, this is
So yeah,
so ridiculous.
that's
Yeah, the Prince of Peace.
yeah, Donald
Yeah.
Trump. Uh, quoting, and they themselves say this. This is not speculation. This is what the Israeli Heritage Foundation quoting Isaiah 9:6. So once again, they're just like playing completely into the messianic idea of Donald Trump. Maybe those schizo posts about Trump being the Antichrist, maybe they weren't too far off in reality. No, they look, they were schizo. It's just simple that Trump is beholden to Zionist interest. That's the open and shut case. You can have fun with your schizo, but that's really all it comes down to. One other thing I'll briefly mention is that Putin visited India on December 4th. Successful meeting with both energy, trade, and defense being discussed. So it looks like none of the secondary sanctions or U.S. threats have really deterred the Indian course of action towards Russia, and by extension, really any of the other BRICS nations. So the American threats there have not held. The U.S. approved the largest arms deal to Taiwan that it ever has, an $11 billion package that, like I said, far exceeds anything else. Details on what said package includes are not clarified just yet, but it's pending congressional approval, which it's going to get. Of course it will. It's a uniparty issue.
Mm-hmm.
But on to the other big news to close out the show, Venezuela. And we now have the blockade established around Venezuela with the seizing of ships. And Trump is bragging about how it's the largest tanker that we've ever seized with all the oil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the but it just solidifies with this blockade the institution of the U.S. military as a piracy organization. And that, remember when this was supposed to be about drug smuggling and preventing the shipment of fentanyl in the United States? Now it's
Oh
just
yeah,
become
yeah,
about
yeah.
just complete.
I swear we said it's really more about oil. Anyways.
Yeah, but you guys are not ready for the IMF loan one. That's what it all comes down to. But when it comes to this, and we've discussed this previously, where Maduro more or less offered to hand over exploitation right of resources to the United States, in which case, I don't know, if I were one of these oil companies that had my assets nationalized in the 2000s, I would be pretty pissed at Trump right now because you just got the sweetheart deal and you turned it down, and that you want to piss around with my assets that got seized from me so you can play whatever this game is and impede my business. I mean, that's... So, I would be pissed if I were in their shoes, but not to have too much sympathy for the oil companies, don't get me wrong. But even after all of that, while I do think it's the IMF loan that we've hammered on this point, I think this is part of a larger strategy. Number one, this is establishing that this is the extent that the U.S. is willing to go to, that is willing to engage in this quite literal gunboat diplomacy, and that's willing to just use outright force of arms to exert its will without any pretense. But also secondarily, because of Rubio's obsession, he wants to strangle out Cuba from any energy source. Number one. Number two, it's the broader question about China as well, where they want to strangle off trade between Venezuela and China in preparation for a larger escalation in East Asia at some point in the future. Now, China is not dependent on Venezuela for oil or for any of its other resources. They have other places they can import these resources from, but it still is. It's a useful card to have in their deck, so to speak. Useful card to have in their hand, so to speak. And it shows that they can strangle it out there. They could use it in a roundabout way to exert more direct control over what ships come through the canal, showing that we're willing to seize vessels. We're willing to employ these tactics. So if you're passing through the Panama Canal, it better be with our green light. Otherwise, we're going to seize your ship. That's also a message that sends as well. And
Yeah.
that, of course, Congress is going along with this. Mind you, they were up in arms about, disingenuously up in arms about the fishing vessels that were attacked, that were allegedly carrying drugs, which, once again, I think that entire story was a fabrication. But the same people who, no less than 3 weeks ago, were talking about how Trump was committing war crimes, which, if we're to accept international law definition, they probably would qualify as that. Now, how much stake you want to put into that system, that's another question entirely. But these same people who were, once again, expressing disingenuous outrage about that are all on board with this effort for a blockade to strangle out the Venezuelan economy and to uh, really put the screws to an already flailing nation that has suffered from both decades of external pressure and also internal mismanagement, which is probably the worst combination that you could come up with. But they're going to continue to do this until they get a departure of the Venezuelan regime. And if they have to use more explicit military force, they're going to. But once again, out of all of this, with the ship that was seized off the coast of Sri Lanka, with the Swedish inspection of the Russian vessel, a line has been crossed, and that we cannot go back. That this has become the norm, and that although this wasn't explicitly his, although this was decades in the making, although there's the continuity of policy, once again, that's going to be Donald Trump's face attached to who broke that convention, who is the
Yeah.
one who established this new set of rules, and of course he was the one who ultimately signed off on it. He was the actor who did this, but there were a number of circumstances leading up to it, and it's just yet another example of Trump's legacy being the sacrificial lamb, so to speak, and he gets to fall on his sword while the American empire accomplishes a goal they've had for years, and it gets to be, once again, Donald Trump's face to, where we can condemn him in the history books. Well, we got everything that we wanted.
Right. He's the fall guy. Can't switch. You can't change direction now. Trump brought us here.
And that's what Biden did
Uh,
with China in the trade war, where we're going to continue. Trump brought us here. So if they were even doing this in his first term,
of course. And it's Biden. I mean, I think that was basically the urgency to get rid of Trump in 2020 and to bring in Biden. Biden was willing to start a war in Ukraine, and Trump maybe wasn't. Or they thought they could trick him into it, but it would be difficult. Which it wasn't for Biden at all. And of course, one of the surprises, because Trump was determined not to allow Nord Stream 2, so he sanctioned it. And of course, Biden comes in, and a little over a year after his inauguration, he makes a similar promise, and then about 8 months later, 9 months later, it's destroyed. But you're supposed to believe it was some Ukrainians and a Polak who did this on a little yacht boat. It's so preposterous.
Hey,
Oh, we don't
Volodymyr
even have.
Z is guilty as sin, if you ask me.
Oh yeah, Volodymyr Z, fat. The other Z that's fat. It's so convoluted. It's so stupid.
It
I don't
really
e-
is. It is all stupid. And you know what? More pipelines are probably going to get blown up in the future.
Oh yeah,
Once again, between a combination of Trump and Biden, and really they're just suits for like what was imperial policy for years in the making. As I will keep hammering home.
yeah,
You have, that's the name of the game now. We got to keep doing it. We got to keep up with industrial and energy infrastructure sabotage. We got to keep up with high seas piracy. We got to keep up with all of this. That it's going to be the norm in the future. And Russia, don't you dare do anything in retaliation that resemble it. China, don't you dare do anything in retaliation that resembles it, because that's against the rules-based order. The rules-based order that we established broke our own rules, but are still going to hold you to those rules because those rules were designed for me to win and you to lose.
yeah.
That's what it all comes down to, and that's the future we're looking at. Um, I did want to cover this, and
Mm-hmm.
now that the dust has settled,
Oh, this is going to be about how Nicki Minaj and Erica Kirk who walked on stage on America Fest, Turning Points America Fest.
that is a
No.
developing story. You know how averse I am to developing
Oh
stories.
my God, it's so cringe. It is
Okay,
so bizarre.
we need to let that marinate. I need at least a week to figure out what's going on there.
How is this even awesome? Oh my God, as if his funeral wasn't like cringe enough. Let's
What
just
what a what a bizarre thing that entire. I don't even know what to make of it. I remember it was supposed to be some watermark of like, here's how right wing politics can be serious because of this assassination, and now it's whatever the hell we're looking at now. I don't even know what to say.
I didn't know this. Erica Kirk's family, like part of the extended family. I don't know if it's see. I don't know if it's a sister or a first cousin, but they've converted to Judaism. To a family that's entirely Jewish. All the children are being raised Jewish. It really puts into context something else when she was on that talk show a few weeks or a few months back, where she says, "Oh yeah, Kirk would get home and silence his phone and say Shabbat Shalom." Like, what the? How is this so cringe? We're gonna do another deep dive about how England was the pivotal country in the transformation of the West, going from a culture to a civilization empire phase, and how when that happens, there's certain things that happen, and this is one of them.
Yeah,
Just remember that even before the Schofield Bible, even before that priest whose name the former priest Anglican who uh, who came up with this idea that was then propounded by the Schofield Bible. Remember that Sir Isaac Newton thought the northwestern people of Europe, conveniently Celtic and Germanic, are the lost tribes of Israel. I used to be completely into this stuff. Full disclosure, not that part. I found that curious, but he wrote reams and reams on theology, even though he was a quote unquote Unitarian Christian. So not he didn't even believe in the Trinity, but pardon me, but he wrote more of this kind of stuff than anything remotely connected with science. But the part that got me, that I was really curious about, was the Temple of Solomon, because of course 9/11 had just happened. And I started becoming fully aware about why they would want the temple to be rebuilt, yada, yada, yada. And then that gets you to Sir Isaac Newton, And of course, he's right there writing this stuff roughly in the same decades, a little sooner, a little later with Oliver Cromwell and the reintroduction of Jews into England. But that synthesis, that
Wasn't that also around the same time of what's his name, like Sabati, like Revi, the false Jewish Messiah, was like
yeah, the
trampling.
Frankists in Turkey.
Yeah.
Yeah, they basically said, you either convert to Islam or you die. But then they found him. They found him reciting psalms with with Jews. So he was jailed a few times, but this time he was put out into a prison in Montenegro in Ulcin. I'll have you know, this relates back to my own personal life. No, not because my family are not Frankists.
Worse,
No,
they're
but in
Montenegrin.
this, because my father was in the Yugoslav military. He made a bunch of friends, in his tank crew, and one of them was a Serb who lived in Montenegro, and particularly in Ulcin. So we always vacationed in Ulcin. Anyways, that's kind of funny. Sorry, I completely hijacked what
No,
you were.
that's see that's the edge to our program. That's the hook.
Nobody's going to give you Ulcin on the other programs.
No, what other geopolitical analysis show are you going to go to where we're going on a tangent that goes from Erica Kirk to Savani Zevi? There's no other program out there that's going to give you this kind of high quality content. I can guarantee you that.
We're setting up a Buy Me a Coffee account. No, we're not.
No, I made a pledge to myself. I will only either break even or lose money on this show. Okay, I have lost far more money on this show just investing
Yeah.
really in new headsets. That's the main expense of the show. And you know what? This is my hobby horse. I'm fine not making any money off of this. So don't feel spend your money on something useful, okay? Because I can do this for free all day. But I've lost my train of. Oh,
Same.
see this is why I have my notes up, because I wanted to sit on it, let it marinate for a week. This thing that happened in Australia, that actually happened
Ah, yes.
hours before we were supposed
Those
to
white
record last week.
nationalists killed 15 Jewish people, including a rabbi. Oh, wait, it wasn't.
Look, don't you underestimate Muslim white nationalists. That is the founding mythology of Bosnia. Look,
Yeah, I know, right?
look, don't make me turn this into a rant about the SS Skanderbeg division.
Yeah.
You want to talk about white Islam? We'll talk about. I don't know. Are Albanians white now?
White Islam.
Yeah, that's. See, no other program is going to give you this high quality analysis. Once we get to the 2 hour mark, it's all bets are off. We can say anything, but
Yeah.
to seriously get through this story.
Yeah.
So naturally, it's what you'd expect. It is the Israel-Palestine conflict transplanted onto your soil. I mean, you could talk about question of false flag, Fed grooming, immigration. There's all of that, but what really sticks out to me is immediately after this happened, you had these people who come out and they morally grandstand on the bodies of their co-religionists, of their co-ethnics, and immediately try to twist this to their own political ends. We need more speech control. We need more online censorship. We need more surveillance. But we're also not going to address anything related to migration. We're not going to address anything related to the foreign policy of the Israeli state. We're not going to address anything that might actually make a substantial change to the circumstances that caused this massacre. But we're going to finger wag at you, and we're going to once again. What I find the most shameful part, we're going to morally grandstand on the dead bodies of our co-ethnics, of our co-religionists, and they do it without shame, without fail, every time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing that the right wingers who told them don't import these people are then those people are imported anyways, and they kill 15 of them. Uh, you know, including some stupid rabbi that was talking about, oh yeah, all of Gaza has to be ours and the West Bank,
and we're going to expel them from the their own homes and whatever. And so he's dead too. Um, Now, there were people who I was talking to, and there are some very strange things about this. People know about Google searches for people involved with the Charlie Kirk assassination, including the killer the day before the attack, and I think there might have been something like this. But you know what? I would say that this isn't as compelling. I don't mean that's not as true. I mean it's not as it's not as interesting a rabbit hole to go down to, because the real takeaway is nobody cares that these 15 Jews were killed. They literally don't care because of what they witnessed for 2 years in Gaza. They don't care. They've No one will care
No,
except
it's
Jews and some supporters.
yeah.
But they brought it on themselves. They they literally they spent some assets they shouldn't have, and they've lost their moral and cultural cachet as a result. And they seem to still want to go for broke. Um, I mean, it's so short sighted. And I even saw a young Jewish woman. She may not have been Jewish. She didn't look particularly Jewish, but she might have been like half Jewish. And she says, this could only happen to Jewish people. Let me explain. Uh, Ahmed Al Ahmed has received $2.5 million for his medical expenses on GoFundMe. That represents more than all the victims combined. And I'm thinking, she goes, full stop. The man is a hero. This was a horrible tragedy, and he stopped it from it being even worse. He was even shot himself. So she completely acknowledges all of that, but she's very angry because she goes on to elaborate. At no point ever in history has the hero who has stopped the tragedy from becoming worse ever received more attention. And of course, attention here is literally weighed in dollar bills than the victims. Well, I'm sorry, lady. You guys kind of cashed out. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a world that, in no small part, thanks to what has happened over the past 2 years in the Middle East, that
Yeah.
is profoundly desensitized to violence. And once again, to put all the necessary disclaimers out here, I don't think wanton violence is good under any circumstances. But I will
You're
reiterate.
just saying that. I'm joking.
Oh,
I'll stop. I'll
so
stop.
so we have a prisoner's dilemma. You're already throwing me under the bus. I'll take that. What can I say? Low trust shiftiness runs through both our blood.
Yeah.
You know
My
what?
brother always says, "You're getting the wall too. Don't think you."
what
I
we're,
love it when he says that.
we both hail from that let's just say dark barbaric land that's non-Germanic Europe. So
Yeah.
well, it is just inborn in our blood. We don't come from high trust societies. We can't all be Scandies, despite the fact that however much you might be mistaken for one. But that's
Oh yeah.
that's getting into deep lore. That's getting into deep lore that I'm not going to go any further into. But
Yeah.
but point being,
Think of me as fat Balkan Bowie.
yeah, I've seen him. I've seen him. I got my car searched at the Canadian border to see this guy. By the way, that's what we're talking about.
I remember this. I've cracked up a lot of people with that, but no. Well, not a lot, but several.
Enough where you explicitly remember. I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
But once again, see, this is why I love getting past the 2 hour mark, because we can just do anything on the show. But to get back to my point, it's like a certain seal has been broken, and I'll say this is this is not a world I'm happy to live in, but these are the rules that are being played by now, and you know what, I just hope that I can. I just hope I'm not on the receiving end of this at some point, nor that any of you are, because it's a disaster. It's a disaster. And as you said, yeah, there's a lot of responsible parties, including a lot of the people who get on there and foam at the mouth and say how great, like, we're gonna take down Gaza, whatever. Yeah, it's and it all comes back to this, and we're I don't know. I just get the biting feeling deep down inside, that we're all screwed because of it. And I
Yeah.
feel this way about a lot of stuff we talk about in Ukraine, and that eventually all of this will come back for you. It'll come back for me. Come back probably for all you people listening here. Maybe not in a direct sense, but in an indirect sense. That we're going to
Mhm.
live in a worse world because of it, and that really, even if not directly, all our times will come in order to be impacted by this. Maybe not you, maybe not anyone you know, but just the shift that this is going to have in society, in the
Yeah.
world, that it already has had in society, in the world, is it's going to make things slightly more hellish than they already are. And
Mhm.
if there is some sort of reverse gear on this, if there's some sort of way to deviate course, I would love to find it, but I'm not counting on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think every party that we've talked about tonight is they're all dropping pretense. They're all going mask off. Um, that's what's happened. It's a kind of there's a revelation that's happening. Even on like domestic issues, you have people like of Indian descent, you know, telling all the whiteys that, yeah, we're going to do this to you. But these aren't even Muslims. They're just Indian, Hindus.
Yeah,
And
it's
yeah, it's or you could look at Trump's actions like, yeah, I guess I have to do piracy. I guess we're going to do piracy
yeah.
for a
Sorry,
while.
sorry, my hand was forced. Just a little bit of piracy for fun.
So uh it's crazy, but that's what they've decided. Um yeah.
Well, I guess I know that we were finally free thanks to Donald Trump's efforts, but we'll have to go back to that
Mm,
basement in Terrasopol and do the show from there again. That's all.
yeah, yeah, it's the only way we survive.
It really is. We spent all our goodwill with the Abkhazians and the South Ossetians,
Mm.
and okay, I blame you for that. At least for part of that.
Mm.
I'll take some responsibility. But you see, the conditions we're forced to operate on are just inhumane.
Mm.
But we do it for you people. We do it for this small but mighty audience. And like I said, I love getting past the 2 hour mark because you can say anything. And for those of you who are still here, I appreciate you enduring whatever the hell the past 17 minutes have been.
Yeah. Thank you.
But like I said, it's our hook, it's our charm. Yeah, we'll talk more about Sabati Zevi and your family history at some point, and discover the deep, rich lore of the Balkans, which there are plenty to be discovered, and um, yeah, I think that we could put a stop in it for here, and
Yeah.
if this is the last show I do before the year ends. I should
Yeah.
say that this. Well, this is obviously gonna be the last show I do before new calendar Christmas. So for all of you who celebrate on Thursday, Merry Christmas. I hope it's a good
Merry
one.
Christmas.
For those of you who celebrate on what is arguably real Christmas, such as yourself, and not myself though. So I suppose I'm a little
Yeah.
hypocritical there.
Well, we say second Christmas
Yeah,
in this house.
yeah. Well, don't worry. We'll remember you come the time. But if this is possibly the last show I do for the year, because things are going to be a little up in the air in the next couple weeks here. I hope you have a happy new year as well, and we'll have some sort of year recap show that will probably at least partially satisfy you. I'm not going to get your expectations up too high. But thank you everyone for tuning in once again. And like I said, this is the last show of the year. I know we've been very disjointed this year for a number of reasons, and I appreciate you guys sticking
Yeah.
with us. And I'm glad we're good enough to stick with even under those kind of circumstances. So
Yeah.
we'll see you guys when we see you, and goodbye.
Goodbye, take care, and Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you.